Hello, I'm Kerri Maher, the author of The Kennedy Debutante. I am so excited to be holding this book in my hands, showing it to you right now. And I really want to thank JeanBookNerd for inviting me to do this video blog. This is my first video blog, so I hope you'll bear with me. I do have a few notes that I'm going to consult from time to time as I tell you about my journey to publication, which is the subject I was invited to talk about. And I love talking about this, partly because as a writer, I've always loved hearing other writers' journeys to publication, because there, although there are many similarities in our journeys, each one is different. And my journey took a very, very long time, and as I was on this path, I was always desperate to learn more about other writers who were, whose journeys were similarly long and seemed similarly difficult, like mine was. So I hope that I will be able to give some of you some advice, but also bring some of you some solace on your own journeys to publication. Those of you who are writers and those of you who are readers who are just interested in this, thank you for joining us as well. I know readers are always really interested to see how writers go about doing what they do. And thank you for watching me and for buying books, not just my books, but all books. It's really because of you guys that we're able to do the work that we do. Okay, so I'm gonna actually go back 20 years to when I had graduated from college. I moved to New York, as many young writers do, and I found myself working at a local community bookstore. Actually, it's called The Community Bookstore in Park Slope, Brooklyn, being a nanny and working on my first full-length novel, which I actually did complete. It was a serious work of literary fiction, which is now in my attic. I worked on that novel for like 2 years. I really, I taught myself how to write a book. And, the great thing about working at the community bookstore was that I was surrounded by other writers and readers, and I got to talk about books and writing all day long. And it was sort of like my own little mini MFA. This was back in the, I did actually look for agents for that book, and this was back in the days when all that process happened on printer paper. None of it was on email yet. So I had to print out copies of my book, and I could only send it to a few agents at a time because, I'd only printed out like 3 copies of my book, but I still managed to query quite a few agents. In the end, I decided that the book needed more work. I did more work. But I got kind of stymied in that process. And what I decided I really needed was an MFA. So I applied to MFA programs, Masters of Fine Arts in Creative Writing for fiction. And lo and behold, I got into the Columbia program, and I went, and that was really a terrific experience. I didn't turn out to work on my novel during that program. I wound up working on some short stories and actually a novella or 2, and that was what my MFA thesis was. But at some point in the MFA process, I probably shouldn't admit this, but I'm going to. I got tired of everything being so serious all the time. All, Philip Roth and Don DeLillo and Chekhov all the time. And I just really wanted to do something fun and different. So one summer I sublet my apartment in Brooklyn, and I went to California, which is where I'm from, and my parents had a house. And I basically wrote a romance novel in one summer. I did some research I hadn't been a big reader of romance novels until that point, so I read a bunch of them, and I just loved them. And reading a lot of romance novels, and then trying to write one myself, really, it taught me so much about writing, and it taught me about pacing and characterization, all of which enhanced what I was learning in my MFA program. So I was also, though, under the mistaken and youthful impression that getting a romance novel published was going to be easier than getting my serious work of literary fiction published, which it turned out not to be the case. And basically what happened was I queried some agents and for the romance novel when I got back to school in the fall, and I got some positive responses, but no one picked it up, and I kind of let it go. I was in my last year of my MFA program. I was teaching at the time as well, and it wasn't the right time for me to throw myself into a career as a romance novelist. But so that novel joined my first novel. In the attic, in boxes, because like I said, this is still back in the days when you had to print everything out. And actually my process back then was I've always composed on a computer, but I used to print out chapters and edit by hand. But I don't actually even do that anymore. I do just about all my edits on the computer, which I find to be efficient and also earth-friendly. So I finished my MFA. I wrote a lot of short stories, which taught me also a lot about the crafts of writing. I got my MFA, and then I started teaching full-time. On a faculty in New Jersey at Fairleigh Dickinson University, and that was great. I really found that there was a great synergy between teaching writing and doing writing. And I found myself writing a mystery novel. So this is now the third genre I was trying my hands out. And so I read some mystery novels, I watched lots of PBS mystery novels, and again, I was learning a lot about how to write a different kind of book. And that novel actually got me my first agent. And so that was very, very, very exciting, to have the validation of an agent who wanted to represent that novel was really just thrilling. And she tried valiantly to sell it. Unfortunately, my mystery novel was about a Great Gatsby-esque tycoon, and when she went out with it was 2008, when the bubble burst and the economy collapsed, and I don't think that there was much of an appetite for very wealthy main characters. But anyway, so that book didn't work out, but it was my first really exciting experience going out on submission. I'm going to sort of back up and layer my information a little bit. While I was waiting to hear back from agents on the mystery novel before I signed with that agent, I wrote another novel, and this is now my fourth novel that we're talking about. This was during the heyday of the paranormal YA novel, and so I had read all the Twilight books, and they were really fun, and I had this idea for a young adult paranormal novel, and I didn't go to California and write all summer, but the novel did just sort of like gush out of me. I wrote it very fast. It was so much fun to write. And so when my agent, now I'm fast forwarding again, when my agent sort of came to me and said, I don't think we're going to have luck with this mystery novel right now, I said, well, I happen to have this YA paranormal. You want to try selling that one? And she wasn't a YA agent, but she was very game, and she gave it a try. But another piece of bad luck with that one was that there was another novel with the exact same premise that had just come out and was like on the New York Times bestseller list. So most of the editors we queried said, sorry, but there's this other book with the same premise. There seemed to be a lot of room for many vampire novels, but not for the premise that I had. So I did actually have one editor in that process who asked me for a non-contractual revision, but it didn't wind up getting picked up. So that was, again, exciting, but very disappointing. And then I needed sort of a break from writing at that point, from writing novels. So what I did was I founded a literary journal called Yarn, the Young Adult Review Network, with some friends of mine. And that was super, super fun. And, you know, it was a way for me to kind of apply my skills as a creative writer, but in a different way, as an editor of short fiction, poetry, and essays for the young adult audience. And that journal is still alive and kicking today. You can check it out at yarn.net. We won an award. We even won an award from the National Book Foundation. And all of that was really exciting. And it kind of led me in a different direction for a little while. I got to sort of thinking about myself also as not only as a writer, but as a teacher of writing and as an editor. And that inspired me to write this book, this is not a writing manual. It came out with Writer's Digest books in 2013, and it has a lot of advice. It's the book that I wish somebody had given me when I was 15 years old, saying I want to be a writer, and all the things that make the writing life worth living, even if you haven't published your first novel yet. So Yarn was kind of humming away for a little while. I was no longer teaching. I had moved up to Massachusetts and I had a child. And after this book, I wrote a little YA contemporary novel, and that was my 5th novel, which it just didn't go anywhere. And, to be totally honest, I think I know why. It was not my best effort. I mean, it was a fun little novel to write. But the truth is, the novel that was really simmering inside me that whole time was The Kennedy Debutante. I got the idea for this book while I was still writing. This is not a writing manual. I was watching a PBS series about great manor houses in England. This was at the height of the Downton Abbey craze. And the marquee estate of the series was Highclere Castle, which is where Downton Abbey was filmed. And one of the estates that they discussed was Chatsworth, which is the seat of the Dukes of Devonshire. And, in the hour-long special about Chatsworth, for a couple of minutes, they talked about how Kathleen Kennedy, John F. Kennedy's younger sister, for a brief shining moment was going to inherit Chatsworth as the future Duchess of Devonshire. And that her romance with the future Duke of Devonshire, Billy Hartington, had been opposed by both their families. And I thought, wow, there's a story there. But I was occupied with other things. I wasn't able to turn my attention to that book right away. And I also thought, oh my God, who am I to write about the Kennedys? And I had never really written full-length historical fiction before. And honestly, the subject and the genre really scared me. But when I finally sat down to write it, I decided that, I just was thinking about it so much. I'd opened up a file on my computer and I was constantly adding links and books and reading things here and there. I'd realized that I just had to write the book. And so I did. And I had to get a new agent. My former agent had left publishing altogether, as many agents do, and she and I are still in touch and still friends. But I had to find a new agent, and I relatively quickly found Margaret O'Connor of the Innisfree Literary Agency, and she is terrific. And she read the book in a weekend and offered to represent me, and this was in mid-May. And she said, I want to send out this book before Memorial Day. And she did. And we quickly got more than one offer, which was just so thrilling. The rest is kind of history. That's it. That's how it happened. So after 20 years and 5 unpublished novels and 1 published memoir, this is my debut novel that I keep picking up upside down. And I am so excited to share it with everybody. I'm very active on Instagram if you want to find me there. And we can talk about books, and we can talk about the Kennedys and all that good stuff. Thank you so much for listening, and that's it. Thank you again.